Obviously, signing Brandon Crawford. I know you guys were asking a little bit about how we were thinking about what would happen if Mason went or if Tommy Edman wasn't ready. So it was something that we had been thinking about just to make sure we had some depth there. But also, bringing in someone with his resume and what he's been able to accomplish, we think he'll be just a great resource for Mason as he continues to develop. Let's be very clear, though. This is Mason's job. We brought in Brandon to just give us that protection should something happen, and he understands that role, and so we obviously we're excited and we're welcoming him, and think he'll be a nice addition to our team. And then there was a corresponding move with Buddy Kennedy, who we ended up DFAing, and so we'll know in a few days that status on what we end up doing with him. But pretty excited about this, and glad we were able to get it done.
Brandon had hamstring injuries last year. Is he fully healthy, and how much confidence do you have that he still has a lot left in the tank?
Well, I think understanding the role is probably most important when you think about this. Obviously, he did go through an extensive physical today. We feel pretty good about where he is physically, and I would not expect to see him in a game in the next week to 10 days. We're going to have to get him back to where he feels confident to participate in the game. But really what we're soft circling is really trying to be ready by mid to late March for us, and again, be that insurance for us.
Is part of the conversation with Brandon him playing positions other than shortstop at this point?
Not really. I think we have a lot of flexibility there, but we don't have a lot of guys that really are that comfortable playing short, with the exception of Mason and Tommy.
Well, when you look at the influx of the infield market over the last week or so, did that expedite your decision, or was this something that you would hope to target at this point?
It was something that we were thinking about for a while. In terms of really engaging in it, as the market started to move, that's when we realized we probably can't wait much longer.
What do you think of all the left-handed bats on your bench, how that sorts out?
Yeah, a lot of them, but I think one of the things that we're most focused on right now is just trying to think about how we look from a defensive standpoint, especially to start the game. I feel like that was one of our weaknesses last year, where we took a step back, and then when you think about where we might try to be in terms of a late inning move, obviously that's where Brandon could fit in and give us some protection.
Can you elaborate too on just did you speak personally with Mason about this?
Ollie did.
Ollie did.
Yeah.
And you mentioned it's his job, and it's not too often we come down here and a rookie has a job. You just usually create a competition. This is not the opposite of it, but
I think
want to show confidence.
Yeah, we just want him to know that this move was not made because we don't have confidence in him.
How much did Tommy's rehab play into this at all, in terms of just the feeling that need to add depth, or was that separate?
Really one of the things that we're trying to do is not move Tommy all around. Get him to one position, and so having the ability to bring in someone like Brandon can allow him to just focus on center field. In terms of how that relates to his rehab, we still have to be patient, but we're still hopeful that he'll be ready.
Be a mentor for him.
Well, I think anybody that has that type of resume can obviously help a young person understand process and how to think about preparation. So, that's certainly something we hope will happen, and I think Brandon understands that he will try to invest in our younger players.
You used the term defensively took a little bit of a step back. Do you feel like some of the moving around played a factor in that, with multiple guys in different spots? Obviously you guys look like potentially more stability this year.
That's what I'm hoping for, and I do feel like some of that movement may have created a little bit of a weakness in terms of our defense. So trying to get guys in more of one position is definitely the mindset.
Because Tommy's been a guy always with the willingness to do that, whatever the team needs from him. But what do you think him sort of taking in and having ownership of that center field role can do for your pitching staff, in terms of just the confidence of his range out there and being able to be a resource?
Well, I think our pitchers would prefer the best defense possible, right? And in terms of Tommy, I think he's excited about just knowing that he can work at one single position. That's not to say something might not happen down the road, but as we focus on spring training and preparation for 2024, that's what his focus will be.
Do you all have a feel for whether maybe some of the injuries Brandon dealt with last year had an effect on how he performed in the field last year?
Well, his reputation is one of those guys that he wants to play. And I imagine some of those injuries affected his play, but obviously in a different role. right? He was trying to be their everyday shortstop, whereas here it's a different role for the Cardinals and the way we use him and how we can hopefully protect him physically to get the most out of him for 162.
Well, you were obviously quite familiar with Crawford in his career. Peak times for both the Giants and Cardinals in 2012, 2014. What struck you about Crawford then, and how have you kind of stayed up to date with his career since those times?
Always been a fan of him because he just always played the game right, played the game hard. Obviously, he was a member of some really successful teams and some teams that beat us, but I just think he was just one of those guys that just went about his business and knew how to be successful. And I mean, that's great to admire that, right? But now he's part of this organization, part of this team, and our expectations are that he can help us continue to win.
He's a guy who was born on the West Coast, played on the West Coast. It sounds like he had multiple options. The fact that he picked your team, how good is that? You've talked about having guys who want to be in St. Louis.
Yeah, I think that's a compliment, and I also think it's partly because of the team we've built. I think he understands we are trying to win, and he wants to be part of something that will win.
Well, how do you involve some of the veteran players in a move like this?
Obviously we were just sort of we talked to them and asked them their opinions, but ultimately it came down to the normal proxy of these decisions,
right.
Years and dollars, and so trying to get that to fit was important, and we were able to work through that over the weekend, and here we are.
The reason why I asked that is you brought up, and some of the guys brought up that Paul and Nolan lobbied for Matt Carpenter, and obviously Paul and Nolan played with Brandon Crawford.
Yeah, this was a little different because when you think back to Carp's situation, right? He was a release player and available and could have done anything. In this particular case, this was more of a focus on really position specific.
Okay.
And as you and I talked about a week ago, what would happen in that scenario, and as you may remember, my answer was not clear, concise, or definitive.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
And so here we are, and now we can be much more definitive.
So it stands out, though maybe it doesn't apply in this, but you've added some guys with postseason experience, postseason familiarity too, whether it was against you or with you, and I didn't know how that factored in.
I think his resume speaks for itself, but that wasn't solely what we were chasing,
so it didn't
right?
even put anything on the scale.
No, it did.
Okay.
It does, for sure. That wouldn't be fair to someone that has that kind of success to ignore their experience, right? But it was really more of someone that can play shortstop and understands it. And then when you're looking at all the different individuals that were out there, all of them might have different expectations of what their role might be, how much playing time they might get, what their demands might be, in terms of how much they're going to play in a week, versus Brandon understood what we're trying to do, and he fit in with that. But so you couple that with his experience, I mean, that's great.
Well, there are critics out there who point to the age of the roster, but is this another sign that you're all in on trying to win now? There's no 3-year plan. You're trying to get this thing back on track this season.
Well, we've always tried to win now. I do think we're trying to balance some of our younger players, because I imagine if you take the average age of our team, it's probably not that old, but certainly we've added players with experience, and that is part of the equation that we're hoping will get us back to success.
Well, as we sort of started counting to 13, Alec Burleson spent the entire season on your active roster last year. Sounding like this, there were only so many shares.
I feel like that kind of question in February is almost nonsensical. So many things can happen, and trying to predict what that looks like a month from now, I don't think it's not healthy. I mean, I understand the math, everybody does, but things happen, and the most important thing we're trying to do is just build enough depth so if something does happen, we're prepared to deal with it.
In regards to Mason and the starting shortstop job, how would you just go about evaluating what you guys have seen in camp from him and as games have started?
Well, I think he's an uber talent, right? I think from a defensive standpoint, we're very confident that he can do the position. It's going to be what type of offensive production does he have, but we don't want to have so much pressure on him that it gets in the way of him having success. Now he has a little bit of a lifeline. He has someone that can help him grow, and we think he'll benefit from that.
You mentioned Crawford being a guy who really likes to play. He can say that he embraces the reserve role. Is it easier said than done to kind of transition into that kind of role?
I don't know. I've been doing this a long time. Like most people that say they're willing to accept a role do. So I'm not really worried about that. And in terms of transition, I think people know where their bodies are at. These guys are athletes, and they're in tune with it.
You earlier were talking about Tommy Edman focusing on center field. How much of that is a product that might have limited time down here? So why kind of complicate it with having to get him in games in other spots?
That really wasn't like a variable in that, but it does make sense to understand that it is 4 weeks away.
Yeah.
So the clock's ticking.
Do you need to see a minimum amount? I mean, do you have an idea on how much he would play before you go, okay?
I don't. Again, we can be as patient as we can, but at some point there might be a decision that has to be made. But that goes back to the whole depth part, and so
Right.
We'll cross that bridge when we have to.
I just wondered if it streamlines things for him. If when you're in games, you're in center field.
I think the
games.
most important thing for him is just where he gets to the point where he's really confident hitting.
Got it.
Taking Flight, Card Spring Training, sponsored by Woods Basement Systems.